Good evening, everyone. Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Siegel. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the summer program manager here at the Fine Arts Work Center. Thank you. So one of our favorite parts of the summer workshop program is that every Monday through Wednesday here in the Common Room, we get to hear from our incredible faculty. Our talks are free and open to the public, and we get to hear readings from our writers and presentations from our artists. Tonight, we're going to hear from poet Matthew Olzmann and writer Paul Lisicky. Each of them will read from their work, and then we'll invite the two of them back up on stage to do a joint Q&A. So before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. Matthew and Paul's books will be available for sale at the back of the room, and they will both be signing books at the event. Paul's looking at me like maybe he won't.
I'm just excited to hear about this policy.
We also have books by other faculty members for sale at the back of the room and in the bookstore, as well as some FOC merch that you should be sure to check out. The Hudson D. Walker Gallery is open after the event. Right now, we are showing an exhibit called Edge Condition, which is curated by past FOC fellow Matt Bullinger and features work by other past FOC fellows. The proceeds of all work sold will go to support FOC's program, so be sure to check it out after the event. So I'd like to give a big shout out to East End Books, who have helped us stock and set up our bookstore. Also shout out to the Arts Foundation of Cape Cod and the Cape Cod Phi Foundation, who support our summer public programming. Our restrooms are located down the hall to your left. And we have a water fountain there as well. We have assisted listening devices and cushions for chairs at the back of the room. Please find me or Hannah if you need an assisted listening device, and we can give you a hand, and you can feel free to grab a cushion if you'd like one. And finally, please turn your cell phones to silent or turn them off so that we can have some uninterrupted time with our writers. I would like to invite Sandra Larkin to the stage, who will introduce Matthew Olzmann.
Bring this mic down a little. How impossible is this, to reach across time or oceans to say the one thing you need to say? Those lines are from Matthew Olzmann's book, Constellation Route, available in the back. And that's what we're all here to do, I think, to figure out how to do the impossible, how to reach across time and oceans to say what we need, not want, but need to say. I've been lucky enough this week to learn from Matthew as I attempt the impossible. Matthew Olzmann is the author of 3 poetry collections, Constellation Route, Mezzanines, and Contradictions in the Design, also available for sale in back in the room. The Harvard Review, in the Harvard Review, Adam Scheffler writes that Constellation Route's emphasis on letters and its love of imaginative, secretive languages allows us to find a way to be aliens together, to form an alternative social world in whose atmosphere we can finally breathe. Olzmann's first collection of poems, Mezzanines, won the 2011 Kundiman Poetry Prize and was published by Alice James Books. His honors and awards include fellowships from Kundiman, the Kresge Arts Foundation, the Breadloaf Writers Conference, and the Kenyon Review Writers Workshop. His poems have appeared in the New York Times, Best American Poetry, the Pushcart Prizes, Kenyon Review, and elsewhere. With Ross White, Olzmann edited Another and Another, an anthology from the Daily Grind writing series in 2012. He received his BA at the University of Michigan Dearborn and his MFA at Warren Wilson College's MFA Program for Writers, where he now teaches. He is also a senior lecturer of creative writing at Dartmouth College and poetry editor for Hyphen magazine. When I'm deciding whether to sign up for a poetry class or a workshop, the first thing I do is read the teacher's work. Matthew Olzmann's poems made it clear that I could learn a lot from him. And I've learned over the past 3 days that he's as good a teacher as he is a poet, which is pretty damn good. So I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce our next speaker, Matthew Olzmann.
Thank you for that introduction. And
It's great to be here. I calculated the other day that I've been coming here for about 9 years, and when I first came here, my second book had not yet entered the world, and I think I was reading poems from that. And then in subsequent years, I was reading poems that would eventually go into my third book, Constellation Route. And now I'm reading some poems that are not in any books, and who knows if they will be or not. And I think I'm gonna read 9 poems, and 5 of them, I believe, I've never read in public before, so who knows how that'll go. I wanted to thank Sarah and David and Hannah and Fatima and the whole Fox staff for making this place what it is and for having me here. And I wanted to thank my workshop. Like every year, I tell the people who run this place that they don't have to give me the best workshop, but then they do. All right, so before we go any further, I want to publicly acknowledge that I love every person in this room. I mean it. We've traveled from all over to be here, and I love each of you, all of you, every last one of you, except Harold. But the rest of you, I love fervently and without limitation. It's important you believe this is a boundless love, rhapsodic, without timidity or hesitation, because everyone is deserving of compassion, absolutely everyone, just not Harold. But for the rest of you, this affection is perfect, unconditional, and free. Not unconditional with air quotes around it, not unconditional like a gatekeeper in the garden saying, look at the fruit, but do not shovel it into thy weird little face, saying, love me and none other, saying the firstborn, the locust, the welt of grief I've pressed upon your back. This is a truly unstoppable wave of tenderness that doesn't traffic in punishment or retribution. In ethically challenged times, it's important to have a stringent moral code, steadfast as the oak whose taproot plunges into the earth, deep enough to allow the tree to never waver, never sway, never give in to the winds of convenience and malice. And therefore, this faultless love never marches out into the frostbitten fields or down the streets of its numerous enemies to shout things like, oh, motherfuckers, I am petty and malevolent and will track you through the sleet to show you all the ways your world can fracture and die. This love would never think to say something like that. Instead, it reaches with a gentle hand, a heart full of benignities, and an unflinching recognition that, without question, there is no living soul unworthy of forgiveness except Harold, and now Marcus, and possibly Mackenzie, but really no one else beyond redemption. This is a love for which there are no omissions, no exclusions, no rules or fine print on this contract, which is binding. This is a poem that Oliver de la Paz, I think, published back when he was running the show online for Academy of American Poets. I decided to read this one today because today my class and I were talking about cliches and how a cliche might be subverted. So this is My Invisible Horse and the Speed of Human Decency. People always tell me don't put the cart before the horse, which is curious because I don't have a horse. Is this some new advancement in public shaming? Repeatedly drawing one's attention to that which one is currently not and never has been in possession of? If ever I happen to obtain a Clydesdale, then I'll align absolutely it to its proper position in relation to the cart, but I can't do that because all I have is the cart, one solitary cart, a little grief wagon that goes precisely nowhere, along with apparently one invisible horse which does not pull, does not haul, does not in any fashion budge, impel, or tow my disaster buggy up the hill or down the road. I'm not asking for much, a more tender world with less hatred strutting through the streets, perhaps a downtick in state-sanctioned violence against civilians, wind through the trees, water under the bridge, kindness. LOL, says the world. These things take time, says the Office of Disappointment. Change cannot be rushed, says a round table of my smartest friends. Then together they say the cart, they say the horse, they say, haven't we told you this already? And so my invisible horse remains standing where it previously stood, between hot dog stands and hallelujahs, between the NASDAQ and the moon's adumbrable visage, between the status quo and the great filter, and I can see it's not my horse's fault, being invisible and not existing, how he's the product of both my imagination and the greater good's failure of imagination. Watch how I press my hand against his translucent flank, how I hold 2 sugar cubes to his hypothetical mouth, how I say I want to believe in him, speaking softly into his missing ear. All right, so like these next 3 poems have definitely never been heard by anyone. Start with the bones, vertebrae, ribs, phalanges. To build a whale, this is how you begin, piece by piece, bone by bone, each by each must be counted and contained. Even the vestigial blip that once was a hip, but now is the ghost of what could have been. To the bones you add the muscle, to the muscle you add the spleen. To the muscle you add the lungs, the brain, the stomach, the spleen. To the spleen add another spleen. Some whales have a dozen. Spleen installation is the easiest part of Whale Assembly 101. The impossible part is adding 1 decade after another. Melville's whale could have lasted 80 years if left unbothered. The blue whale can live over a century. A bowhead can live twice that length. Obsession has no age, no beginning, and no end. That's what the whale is about. All these years must be imagined into the body of your whale. The construction of time is painstaking work, but you can't have a whale without it. Once you've built time, add mystery. After mystery, add darkness, one unable to make peace with its depths and isolation. The secret your grandfather told you when you were a child, the mist your mother's memory wanders through, the terrible thing you did one September to protect someone you thought you loved. Melville wrote, "There is no folly of the beast of the earth which is not infinitely outdone by the madness of men." He wrote extensively about chasing whales, but not one word about how to build one, and that's his greatest error. To chase the whale, you must build the whale, or there is no whale to chase. Just where do you think whales come from? God, a biological accident, or a miscalculation in the labs of Mother Nature? Enough already. The whale comes from you, and you alone. You only have to build it. You only have to follow forever as it dives and surfaces, rips the length of oceans, never ceases. What you call the animal and what that choice might say about you. There are people in this world who call a group of bunnies a fluffle. And I find it hard to hate humanity when I remember this. I mean, there are other options. Herd, warren, colony, drove, all adequate collective nouns. A bevy of rabbits, a kindle of rabbits, a nest. And yet, there are adult humans somewhere, in northern Canada mostly, but still they exist, humans who've thought this through and have made the unflinching decision to say, "Oh, look at that fluffle of bunnies, isn't it wonderful?" And yes, I say they decided to do this because it is a decision, a choice, opting for wonder despite what else is available. Like I know our atoms are 98% identical to the atoms of dead stars. That means we were made from those celestial beings. This feels miraculous, and yet it also means a magnificent light somewhere has been extinguished so that we might exist. You can choose how to interpret each detail. I used to look at the world and feel equal parts delight and terror. Lately, it seems the scales have begun to tip. The mystery is receding, withdrawing itself from view. I haven't cut the lawn in weeks, but there are days when I look out the back window and witness something ephemeral skittering from the tall grass. You see the tremble of fur, ears that suddenly point up as if listening to some ancient truth. Then it's back into the grass. And now let us pray. Heavenly Father, please don't let me email the wrong person. Please don't let me hit reply all when I mean to reply only to Pete. Please don't let me find myself at a red light, windows down, volume up, in the middle of my very best Whitney Houston routine with one of my neighbors in the next car staring. if I should, astonished, stand before an automatic door, waving my hand in a manner that suggests the automatic door makes me believe I'm a Jedi, please don't let the person behind me be a trustee for the institution where I am employed. I humiliate myself every day. I humiliate myself every day, and yet I want to throw myself into traffic, and yet I long to preserve what little dignity I have left, and yet something inside me yearns to turn to the next person in the grocery line and ask the most random shit. For example, did you know that because it crosses the international date line, Alaska is the most eastern and most western state? Did you know that the record for the most live rattlesnakes held by the tail in a person's mouth at one time is 13? Did you know people can glow in the dark, but our eyes aren't sensitive enough to see it? Did you want to know any of this? Well, buckle up, because you're about to find out. My internal monologue is just an old man at the gates, helplessly shouting, "Don't say the weird thing, don't say the weird thing, don't say the weird thing, don't say the weird thing, too late." Like a satellite launched from the earth, that weird thing is now part of the cosmos, orbiting this small life, with me down here, unable to reel it back. The farthest man-made object from Earth is Voyager 1. Sent into space shortly after my birth, it's now many billion miles outside the reaches of our solar system. Obsolete, slightly broken, it sometimes goes silent for months. It sometimes sends unintelligible bursts of binary riddles. It sometimes just plays dead. But last week it sprang to life again, whispering the secrets of the universe to us once more. I find a vast and incorruptible calmness in that. To exist far beyond the noise of this place, to be made by humans but feel utterly separate from them, to feel that separation widen into a chasm that spans the length of star systems, to drift farther and farther into the quiet, and even then to continue composing and transcribing little messages, to continue sending them home. So I have 4 poems left, and these are all wedding poems. And I wrote a bunch of wedding poems because I was asked to read some poems at a couple weddings, and a lot of times I would write a poem and they'd say nope, and so I had to write a lot to get some that were acceptable. But so this is one that I was not able to read at a wedding. This is an epithalamium during mating season. When the testicles of the marsupial mouse begin to disintegrate, he swells with a panic that drives him to have sex until he dies. Tradition dictates that the female black widow eats her mate, and that practice also exists among the greater praying mantis community. Meanwhile, these two humans keep staring into each other's eyes, saying, "I do, I do, I do." But what exactly do they do? Do they fight lions or guard their eggs on the side of an active volcano? Probably not. Does this mean their devotion is any less enduring, any less fervent or profound than that of the hippopotamus who sprays its feces into the sky to attract a mate? No. It means that we're lucky to be human, capable of thinking this through before falling dead from the amorous air, as is the custom of the common honeybee. Any wild thing can feel. Any feeling can propel the animal forward. Sometimes the difference between instinct and love is hesitation, the capacity to stand at the inception of some passionate wilderness, understand its magnitude, its peril, then enter, not because the marionette strings of compulsion and desire yank us forward, but because we're summoned into the immensity of and by our own free will, and that is what we want. That is what we choose. Thank you. Epithalamium with fingerprints on everything. On one side of the aisle, we have a former tennis champion who became an elite mathematician, fluent in 4 languages, who, when not building sustainable housing for our community, serves as a celebrity hand model, pastry chef, and our nation's leading limnologist. On the other side of the aisle, we have Chet. Chet is good at smoking weed out of organic fruit and sleeping past noon. I'm sure he's fine at other things as well, but does this pairing make sense? Not really, but that's what makes it legit. Everything sacred begins in mystery. Every secret is perplexing to those outside its domain. We still don't know what Earth's core is made of or where the moon came from. We don't know how life arrived on our planet or why we can't find it elsewhere. We can't comprehend the nature of dark matter, but like the rope that rings the steeple bell, we feel its persistent pull. This is how the furnace of the heart fills with its fire. There's a strangeness or paradox, a pilgrimage into the impossible. We want to touch the unknowable, but even our fingerprints are mysteries to us. Originally, we believed they helped with grip. That proved to be completely wrong. Now we know only that they're unique, unfathomable, and when they touch the face of the beloved, they understand something that we do not. This is an epithalamium that turns from the garden. The problem with flowers in poetry is that the petals are always ethereal and wispy, early buds of new attraction. Most have never endured the first frost of the upper Midwest or the appetite of the rose weevil. I hope you find a love that's more enduring, one that fits like the moth-eaten corduroy jacket I found in a thrift store discount bin. It smells sour because its previous owner was sweating for decades and probably died in it. I call that consistency. A love that's immune to the charms of fashion. A love that would never replace you with a selection from a newer catalog. I don't want you to give up on splendor. Skepticism is passé. I just wish for you a love that's less blossomy, one that can honor the inevitable unraveling edges. I'm from Detroit. We're drawn to things eaten by rust, the wind that shakes the remains of the old train station, the elm tree growing through the roof of the abandoned axle factory. This is also the natural world, also a metaphor for love. I keep thinking about that story where Adam could not recognize paradise until he had seen what was beyond the gates. Only then did he understand. Where I live now, there are many gardens, also forests and rivers. My wife ignores these, but takes pictures of the ancient clock tower at the center of town. Its face is weathered from enduring the 50-year storms. 3 of its numbers have fallen off. Ivy crawls up and tangles around the hands, but those hands still turn towards something eternal. So this is the last one. It's another one. Is anyone getting married sometime soon? Like, if so, this suite of poems is all dedicated in your direction. But this is an epithalamium that refuses to ignore the possibility of a zombie apocalypse. Let's be honest. What each of us wants is to never get eaten by zombies. And the shotgun-shaped truth of the matter is we're less likely to be ravaged by the ravenous appetites of the dead if someone just loves us. We each need a partner posted on the roof, someone with a crossbow watching the high cornfields for signs of movement. There needs to be someone willing to brave the basement during the power outage, someone to descend the midnight staircase to repair the generator. We need a reserve supply of bandages, fragmentation grenades, and flamethrowers just in case this whole grid goes down. I'm afraid of dying alone, and I imagine I'm not alone in that fear. Those of us who've known sorrow know the world is populated by those who will respond to our outstretched arms by eating our outstretched arms. The God-honest miracle we celebrate today is these gentle and soon-to-be betrothed friends of ours have found in each other a companion willing to declare in public, I promise to never eat your extremities, kidneys, or brains. And furthermore, I vow to protect you from those who would. We call this commitment marriage, and there is no greater honor than to say, even when humanity withers around us, I will guard the humanity that stirs, restless and delicate, like a fawn in a field of trillium in you, if the lights of the city go dark, if the highways fall silent, if every radio fills with static. If you are surrounded by a flesh-eating foulness and running low on ammo, I will love you like an unmarked helicopter flying in from the horizon. I will hover over you, and with my machine gunners struggling to hold the danger back, I will lower the rope ladder to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I mean zombie love, or I guess love in spite of zombies. Let's have another round of applause for Matthew Olzmann. And thank you to Sandra, I don't know where you are. Oh, for that beautiful introduction. And now I would like to invite Wayne Bund to the stage to introduce Paul Lisicky.
I often find my creative life walks a path that Paul Lisicky has forged. I first met Paul over 20 years ago when I was a senior at the University of Oregon, and he was a visiting scholar coming to our creative writing program. He was the judge for the student fiction contest. I entered and placed second place with a very stream of consciousness piece about a lover mourning his dead husband. Afterwards, Paul approached me with a curiosity and affirmation about my work that inspired me to continue to write. I don't remember his exact words, but I remember more the joy of getting to ask him about Joni Mitchell. You see, I am a Blue album Joni fan, and I'd recently discovered her. Joni begins Blue with the line, "I am on a lonely road and I am traveling," and coming across Paul's writing made me feel less lonely in my creative life. Paul Lisicky is the author of 7 books, including Later, My Life at the Edge of the World, The Narrow Door, Unbuilt Projects, The Burning House, Famous Builder, and Lawnboy. The Narrow Door was a New York Times editor's choice and a finalist for the Randy Shilts Award for Gay Nonfiction. Paul's most recent book, Later, My Life at the Edge of the World, was selected as one of NPR's best books of 2020. Alexander Chee reviewed it for the LA Times, writing, "This memoir is much like Paul's Provincetown, exulting in tenderness and lust, lit with flashes of poignant spectacle, even the majestic, the way a drag queen at night can become, in sequins under the spotlight, full of the fire and beauty we associate with goddesses, before descending back to the realm of the human." I picked up a copy of Later on March 17, 2020, on my 39th birthday, from East End Books, which also happened to be the day that things shut down in Provincetown because of the pandemic. I was living at 411 Commercial at the time, in the basement apartment. Paul's Later was a beacon of hope for me at the time, the way this magical town of light and sandbars can become a cementing process for one becoming an artist. I found it humorous at one point that Paul wrote about moving into 411 Commercial in a room that was right above where I was reading the book in the same place. Paul's work has appeared in The Atlantic, BuzzFeed, The Cut, Fence, The New York Times, Ploughshares, Tin House, and in many other magazines and anthologies. His honors include fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment of the Arts, and he was a fellow here at the Fine Arts Work Center. He has taught in the creative writing program at Antioch University, Los Angeles, Cornell University, New York University, Sarah Lawrence College, the University of Austin, and elsewhere. He is currently a professor of English in the MFA Program in creative writing at Rutgers University-Camden, where he is editor of StoryQuarterly. One can say of Joni Mitchell fans that you are either in the camp of Blue or Hajira. While Blue, released in 1971, is often seen as Joni Mitchell's most popular album, Hajira, released in 1976, represents an artist at the height of their creative potential, continuing to take risks. Paul admitted to me on Sunday when I asked him that he is a Hajira fan, which I thought he was. And this makes sense. Paul is an artist in his prime, continuing to take risks in form and content as he writes his way across the American landscape. Paul's new memoir, Song So Wild and Blue, A Life with Joni Mitchell, is forthcoming from HarperOne in February 2025, and I cannot wait. I'm so pleased to introduce Paul Lisicky.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much, Wayne. That was an unbelievable introduction, and I'm really touched and honored, and it's great to see all of you here. Gosh, there's so many. You're getting to preview the cover, so I'll tell you about this in a second. First, I just want to make sure I thank Sharon and David and Sarah and Chandra and Fatima and Hannah and Naya for all of their good work in holding this community together. I also want to thank all of the people all the way back to Alan Dugan and Stanley Kunitz. So many people have given their lives and given so much love for decades, and I just want to remember all of them. I'd like to thank my students are amazing this week. Not just they're amazing their work is amazing, but the conversations that we're having in class are so vital and challenging and rich, and I'm learning so much from this group and feel super lucky to sit around the table with them. So this was supposed to be previewed tomorrow morning on Electric Lit, but they're doing it next Wednesday, so you're getting to see the cover for the first time. It's a book about Joni Mitchell's songs and how they've shaped my life as an artist and as a human. And goodness, I've gone into a fugue state. I mentioned Joni Mitchell and everything goes blank. I'm going to read, I've read from this book for the last 2 years, and I'm going to read from a chapter that's a bit of an outlier in that Joni is hardly mentioned in this particular set of scenes. I think what happens in the book is that I start to write as Joni Mitchell would write. I've internalized her visual sense to a degree where it just becomes a part of the narration. It's from a sprawling chapter called The Jungle Line from The Hissing of Summer Lawns, the song is from The Hissing of Summer Lawns. And this is about a 23-page chapter in the book, and I somehow distilled this down to 17 minutes to all of its pressure points. And so I'm excited about reading it as a remix of that chapter. And I think that's all you need to know. Oh, it would be helpful for you to know that I lived in Provincetown for many years, from 1991 to 2007. So this marks the moment, the year after which my ex and I sold the house here and moved to Fire Island. So that will help you. That will help with some context. Shadbush, sassafras, juneberry, black cherry, holly, maritime forest. Layers of heavy minerals swirled into the white sand beach, the color of garnet. Monarch butterflies over the dunes, high and low, not in groups but on their own, feeding on flower nectar. Workers racing the boardwalks to fix some problem, a crack in the pool lining, rotten shower stall, soft plank in the decking. The sun so potent it might have been a character penetrating the skin. Leaves too. I'd never been in leaves like that. Thick leaves always curated your looking. They softened hard edges. They hid what didn't want to be seen, which was a lot. They were falling too, a few of them, nearly all of them patched with red and gold, some desiccation around the edges. It was September, the late days of the month, still warm, but swirled with cool air, summer coming to a close. The houses usually full in summer were empty now, and that was why I brought my teaching prep out here to Fire Island. When the houses around our house were empty, I felt my aloneness less, forgot that I missed human touch. There was no reason to miss human touch if it wasn't part of the range of options. Out here during the week, once the contractors took the ferry back to Sayville on the mainland, the human world receded. Late afternoon, off-season, and my senses turned to animals, woods, water, all the things I missed when I was back in the city. I went to the store, but the shelves were full of open spaces. The owners already preparing for shutting down in a month, only stocking the basics. If one wasn't up to the challenge of making do with less, then there wasn't much point in being here. I liked having to deal with fewer options when I was used to having options. Fewer options. Isn't that why I was out here rather than in Manhattan, where in order to deal with the overstimulation of city life, I'd carved out a smaller hoofprint over time, a square of blocks from West 14th to 25th. By 2007, I turned the city into a small town, small as our one-bedroom apartment. Weren't small apartments possible because, in theory, people only went to bed in them, spending the rest of the day in coffee shops, bars, the office, meeting rooms, in church basements? But car horns, the constant low rumble, sidewalk life, the neurotic fixation on the 20 minutes ahead of them. It was so easy to be another placeholder in that hive, so easy to think you were unique when you passed the men at the bar who cracked up, threw back their heads and clapped once, as if to signal they'd always been in on the joke and you'd always be outside. The skin between the inside and outside was so thin, the trees might have been in the living room and vice versa. The sound of the ocean, 500 feet on the other side of the dune, filling the kitchen with a roar, but friendly lion. Here I was as deep in my life as I'd ever been. I wasn't thinking about it from above, from the height of our apartment. I wasn't thinking about March when I was in September, but how far I was from my Provincetown life, which in its best years was a life of new people all the time, of not knowing what was next. I loved Fire Island for the way the human intertwined with the world of animals and plants. No cars or roads, instead raised boardwalks with white stripes painted along the edge. Streetlights? Non-existent. Deer wandering around with astonishing nonchalance. Rabbits, box turtles, snakes, fowler's toads, in the places you couldn't see. Maybe it was simply concealment that I was drawn to, a place that refused to prune and tame itself for convention, the sake of sunlight and display. When you walked at night, you had to tune yourself to your muscles, nerves, and senses, especially true in the meat rack, also known as the Judy Garland Memorial Forest. If you're walking from Cherry Grove back to the Pines, in which aiming a flashlight down the path was not just gauche, but lacking in substance, character, you had to look, squint, listen for the sounds around you. That rustling at night? Monster? No, just some guy deep in the bayberry with a cigarette aglow, looking to hook up. During the day, sunlight poured on the beach, south-facing, Caribbean. It went through your pupils all the way to the back of your head until your vision went deep red, veins branching. The ocean was similarly intense. Body surf a wave, and you risked getting driven into the slope, sinuses filling, your neck jolted into shock, electric. It was said that the son of one long-term resident broke his back by doing just that and was a quadriplegic for the rest of his life. If a place could be as strange as one of Joni's songs, then this was it. The south-facing beach was as beautiful as any beach I'd ever seen, holly forest up against the secondary dune. The sun struck it as if it had waited all night to do so and couldn't wait to saturate and heat it up, to get down into the cool, dark spaces between trees. But something was off about the place, something wonky. It tried to be glamorous with its mid-century modern houses, some with flat roofs, others with soaring peaks, but the land would never be as trim and tidy as any part of the Hamptons or even Loveladies on Long Beach Island, its nearest relative. There was too much greenery, burgeoning, creeping. The few lawns looked wrong. It suggested a swamp, an Everglades, but wrenched out of its expected geography, lifted to northern latitudes. Litter in the woods, propane tanks exposed, the occasional sagging electric line, summer downpours turning the single dirt road into a stagnant, muddy lake that wouldn't evaporate for weeks. But this low-level chaos was central to its appeal. Beauty required rot. It was its closest sibling. Rot kept its participants awake. And in that way, the landscape felt like the correlative to so many Joni songs. The meticulousness of those songs. Every second wanted to be extraordinary, but the extraordinary also required some mess for the sake of contrast. Slack strings, dissonance, more words shoveled into the line than a melody to contain them. They weren't designed to make you feel comfortable. You couldn't simply listen to them on autopilot as you could so many other songs, but they, like this place, made you love them for their sense of reaching, for embodying imperfection and thus horror. The sublime is never easy because the longer you look and listen to it, the more it is pointing to decay, endings, and death. Not to mention that none of it was guaranteed beyond next week. In just the last year, the water had eroded the bank along the bay, exposing the gnarled roots of the trees, a major footpath gone, ledge worn away by the tides. Every winter, storms of longer duration stole away some beachside pools, staircases, decks, leaving mangled wreckage in their wake. It was impossible to calculate how much time the place had left, even when a dredge churned fresh sand out into the beach every few years, a masquerade of safety. Maybe what I'm not getting down here is that we were trying to build a home together. We'd had a home before, but everything about the Provincetown house was haunted, not just by the life my partner and his former partner had built, all the signs, ceramic jugs, and hutches collected at Vermont flea markets, but by all the people who'd cooked and slept there back to 1790. This was a house that hadn't had much past in it. We'd had enough past. We were soaked in it. To be a gay man in 2007 was to have nothing but the past and its weight. But this place felt light, new. Here, everything was determinedly new, if a charcoal-colored, mid-century modern ranch built in the late 1960s could be called new. It was too casual to be taken seriously when all the props surrounding us said, "You are serious. You must maintain that." We could buy things for the house together, a painting for the wall, a rice paper light fixture, 4 black Eames chairs around the glass dining table. The meaning of us as a couple could be found in those things, all the occasions we marked by deciding on that together. 2 points of view fused. That felt precious to me 12 years into our relationship. It was startling to me that it took that long. We'd taken ourselves to a place that operated under a different set of conditions. A culture of parties sounds like fun, but it has a dark side. It's not concerned with anybody on the perimeter. On some level, it has to work like that, or you can't invite those 20 people over for spontaneous drinks after the bars close. Your happiness happens against someone else's. Under the circumstances, how could the person on the other side of that not hear the pool music as aggression, the parties as against you personally? You lose a little of your generosity, your perspective. You own a house. You forget how lucky you are to be in the extraordinary place, to have such problems. It was harder to have fun when we'd lost the thing that had held us together. We'd lost a vocabulary of understanding. What were we, if not that? A sense of the world that was never on our side. Our community had stopped dying en masse from AIDS. Drugs kept people alive longer than they expected to be alive, though we didn't yet know how long that was. We no longer had to live in heightened alert. Who could have seen that 10 years before? All we'd had was our ability to take care of one another, and nobody knew how to talk about a new reality, which had shifted as quickly as a storm scudding across the bay. I thought of polio being eradicated by a vaccine in a sugar cube, the quickness of its delivery after so much suffering. Shouldn't we have been able to talk about the people we missed? How it felt to survive when the only thing we were certain of was that we had no future, it couldn't be counted upon, and if there was anything like a future, it was one in which we were diminished, compromised. It was too much to stay in that place. Some preferred to behave as if the worst of those years had never happened, as if it were beyond our capacity to comprehend it emotionally and physically. It was still corroding our psychic metal. Our ability to process and understand narrowed as the years went on, the calendar slipping off the wall. Humans forget, not just out of laziness, but as a survival tool. It's work. And a new formality arrived as a way to keep conversation from getting to be too specific and intimate. The challenge was to make sure that at any dinner party, no conversation mattered too much, even though it was taxing to be in that place for very long. It took discipline. It would have been easier to summarize string theory. The all-night party transformed the beach into a movie set. The birds, moths, and mosquitoes didn't know what to do with the music, the hot lights, the dancers thrashing and frenetic beneath them. Usually they got close, veered off, went back in again, dazed. 2 a.m. Drugs transformed the air. It didn't even matter if you were taking them or not. Every living creature appeared to absorb them. Willows took them up through the water in their root systems and swelled, splayed open. The leaves got thicker, more liquid. Birds' voices fell down an octave and pooled. As for the borderlines in Joni's song of that same name, gone. Nothing was pinned down. To see deer this close, deer that didn't dart off, was to see that they had singular personalities. That one bold, that one playful and shy. Antlers that looked almost as nice as the white papier-mâché ones we'd pinned to the wall. They were like dogs, yellow labs, but with more mystery and gravitas, as if they'd mated with space aliens. They all had faces. They had individual character. When I watched them, they pulled me into the present with the business of their living, their own rules always opaque to me, browsing for food at dusk and dawn, taking to the beach and swimming, sometimes at the height of day. Where did they go when it started to rain? Under someone's deck? In some pocket of trees where they closed their eyes and put up with drops on their faces? The possibilities of that question could occupy me for a half hour. It was late one afternoon, just before the last ferry of the day. I was out here by myself, and as usual, I was rushing around in that hour, sweeping sand into a dustpan, tying twine around newspapers, rushing to the bathroom to put the contact lens solution in my bag, and oh, that. The last minutes of locking up were always hectic in a way they wouldn't be hectic if the island could have been reached by train or car. And just as I locked the front door, I spotted the deer through the mesh fence, strolling through the empty lot next door like a relaxed moose, brawny and curious but peaceful, chin up, hide maybe a few shades darker than a younger deer, which suggested age, majesty. But the startling thing, the rack on top of his head, 6 points. A chandelier, back to home decor. If he were a man, he'd be a linebacker for the Giants, all muscle and tight hide. The two of us had the place to ourselves, Everything would have been different if someone had been around to see us, to be observed. It would have changed everything. The human intrusion. We'd have been watching ourselves, fear of cuteness, fear of stupidity, the anthropomorphic projection. He turned to me, walked over to the fence without hesitation. I put my bag down on the deck and met him. We were standing face to face, only the mesh fence between us, all of 2 feet apart. Maybe he was expecting me to pass him a celery stalk, but the closest he came to begging was his head dipping down. One would think that an animal of that size would have charged if he'd felt like it, just to show me he could do it. Humans do some version of that to one another all the time. Why not use that size against me, against human creatures? If he had a smell, it was hard to pin down. Wet leaves, lake, wood chips, dark, mossy green. Though I don't mean shit. Perhaps my smell was extreme to him, not how I smelled to other humans. I talked, but only some questions. At some point, he understood that I wasn't going to feed him. And once that idea rolled away, we were somewhere different. A pocket of deep interest, a circle of attention, mutual. The space between us, something to protect. One step closer, and we couldn't possibly see each other. His eyes as brown as a chocolate bar. Different beings, but standing on the same spot of earth at the same time. 7 miles out from the mainland, 73.1 latitude, 52.5 miles east of New York City. When had they lost their fear of us? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was beautiful. And thank you to Wayne for that introduction. Thank you both for getting back on the stage. So we're going to have a joint Q&A now with Paul and Matthew. We are live streaming, so if anybody has a question, please speak into the mic so that our viewers at home can hear you. Does anybody have a question for either Matthew or Paul, or Matthew and Paul? Hannah will bring a mic to you momentarily.
There's this zeitgeist moment, right? Oh, it just came on.
Yay.
Maybe because I'm a lesbian, I know the whole Brandi Carlile, Joni Mitchell thing, and there's like a mad mania. But I just wondered what it was like to, you've probably been writing this all along, right? So like, I don't know how to have your memoir or your own experience in life sort of meet this weird cultural moment in which Joni just seems to have exploded to like a new generation or people welcoming back. Like, I think this happens like when, in my piece and someone said, oh, there's another piece about falling in love with a boxer. And I was like, oh, great. But this always happens, right? Like we all seem to be on these, there seems to be these paths that coexist sometimes.
Right. I talk about all that quite directly in the opening chapter. I have to tell you, I was so lucky with this book. I had been on Twitter and I'd posted a picture of Joni and Brandi Carlile that my future editor saw and sent me a DM that said, Paul, would you be ever interested in writing a book about Joni Mitchell? And I said, that sounds like an interesting idea, but was playing it totally cool. And then he said, who's your agent? I told him my agent's name. He said, I love him. I'll be in touch with him next week. So I had not conceived of this book. I think the complexity of Joni is that Joni is literally about Joni is a village, is about 12 people, not just someone who has looked different over time and changed her stylistic center over time, but someone who is like a new person again and again and again. And I think my particular take on Joni is deliberately, it's different from other takes on Joni. I wrote a lot about Joni from a queer perspective, but I wanted to make sure that there was room for other readers as well. There are other books about Joni out there. There's one that came out that some of you probably know just last week by the critic Ann Powers, and there's no overlap, and it's essentially as much, even more so, about my own creative leaps and turns over time, and how my love for this particular artist has taught me again and again and again, quite literally, how to live. I mean, I love her dearly. I've loved her since I was 8 years old, and the wonderful thing about after writing 270 pages, I love her even more. And so,
Thank you.
yeah. Thanks, Eve.
Other questions?
Hey, I have a question for Matthew. This is going to sound like a joke question, but it's not. Can you tell us a little bit more about Harold?
Yeah, I had to be careful choosing that name, and I actually didn't really commit to that name until the first time I read it in public. I was able to look at the roster of who was going to be in the room and saw that there was no one named Harold. And I tried to pick a name that it wasn't too commonly used right now. But what I was sort of interested in there with using names in that case was social media and the sort of language of like the public call out, which I find very terrifying, but I also thought there's a type of energy in that language, and I was like, how would that work in poetry? So that's kind of the genesis for that specific move. My friend, the poet Nathan McLean, came up to me after I read it for the first time. He's like, my middle name's Harold, and he tells everyone that it's about him.
Hi, my question's for Matthew, but could really be for both of you. Any advice on incorporating humor into your work, and what are the ways in which it works on the page, but you feel it works better when it's being read to an audience, or any suggestions?
You should go, Matthew. I had a few things to say.
Yeah, I think humor can be, for me, I've found it to be, I think it's really useful for a couple things. I'm mostly interested in a type of tonal contrast, and that could be, and I think humor can be a wonderful sort of contrasting element, moving from one emotion to another. I think it's really noticeable if something's humorous and then it's kind of sad or it's contemplative. But that movement could also be from certainty to doubt, or from anger to sorrow. But anytime you put two emotions next to each other, I find the second one seems to be set off by as a way of contrast. I'm also interested in how humor can, humor and absurdity to a degree disrupts the reader's ability to anticipate where you're going, or can create a sense of curiosity. I think in people's daily lives, they use humor as a defense mechanism, as a type of criticism, as a way to draw people in or engage with people or connect with people, and all those things can happen on the page as well. I sometimes get asked about humor fairly frequently, and I don't actually think I'm that funny in like the world of comedy. I think my poems are sort of funny only in the world of poetry, where no one expects any amount of humor, and like poets tend to be a pretty somber bunch, so even a little humor feels like, wow, this is hilarious, but it wouldn't work as stand-up comedy. And I also have I'm completely incapable of writing jokes. Like if I try to write a joke, it's not happening. But when I'm drafting drafting a poem, if something amuses me, I've learned over time to sort of pay attention to that. If something makes me laugh or something seems kind of funny or strange to me, I try to grab onto those moments, but I'm not really capable of consciously sitting down and saying, all right, now I'm going to be funny. So if it happens, it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
One thing I've noticed about myself lately in my everyday life is that I'm super funny on my text to the people I love. And it's there are about 5 people in the world whom I can crack up and be shocked by my comedic gifts. And it doesn't happen in any other realm. It doesn't happen in the classroom. And it occurred to me that part of that humor in those texts is an act of love, and I'd like to bring more of that back to my work. I think some of my earlier work is funnier than what I've written lately. I think there are parts of the Joni book that are funny, but I'd like to just play it in that frame a little more again. It's helpful to think about it as care or just love and delight and charm.
So there's a real keen tonal control in the piece you read and of other works of yours. I'm saying, Paul. And so he's saying he doesn't consciously necessarily, or maybe he said he does consciously try to bring in humor. Do you consciously try to work on a kind of equanimity in your tonal? I'm talking to you, Paul. He's trying to make a joke like, you're talking to him? He's not, he has no equanimity. Do you consciously try to sustain a certain ruminative or tonal control in your writing? And long form, it's obviously going to be potentially a lot harder.
Right. I think there's lots of tonal flexibility in this book. It's a set of pressure points written across the span of my life till now. And yes, some of it is much more manic and anarchic. And I think that what you hear as tonal control is probably just in sync with, that chapter feels like it's pre-morning to me, like mourning. I think that speaker knows that everything he's built in his life till now is about to come undone. And so I think what you hear is in language an attempt to hold oneself together before that speaker, that version of me lets go, lets loose. It was an oddly lonely time, but it's funny, as I was reading about that deer felt so significant. I think it was the most significant moment in my life, and it's longer in the book. And what I didn't read for you is that, as I said, as I left the deer, I started sobbing. And the deer was still there waiting for me to come back. And yeah.
A couple of things. One is I love the description of Fire Island. I've lived there a couple summers here and there, and it's just so visual, the way you described it with the wooden planks, and I could just see it in my mind, so thanks for that. And also with the wedding poems, I really enjoyed them, and I was just wondering if the presentation that you did, like saying I wrote these for weddings, was that part of the presentation, or did you really write them for weddings?
The zombie poem I read at the wedding of the poet Perry Janes, and then there are a couple other weddings. I had to write a wedding poem for my sister's wedding and another friend's wedding, and I found it really hard. And I initially didn't think I was going to enjoy writing them, but what I found was I was surprised that I actually really enjoyed writing them, and I kept writing them for a while. And what I enjoyed about it was, a lot of times as a writer, you're sort of trying to guess what your audience or readers might be thinking or anticipating or expecting, and you have no idea. It's just a sort of anonymous person out there, hopefully reading your poems. But with this type of writing an occasional poem for a wedding, even if I didn't know the people who are going to be in the wedding, which sometimes I did, you know a lot about the audience. You know a lot about what the audience is going to be expecting from that type of poem. You can kind of guess what the room might look like, the sort of dynamics between people that are there. And that felt like a real gift, because like knowing what people would be anticipating or expecting gave me something that I could then embrace or push back against or try to subvert to create moments of surprise or anything else. So I ended up really sort of enjoying that mode of writing, because I think I learned something from it. So.
Well, thank you all so much. As a reminder, Matthew and Paul are going to be signing books in the back. Please check out our gallery and our bookstore where we have books from other faculty. If you are here next week, we have faculty events Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at 5 p.m. And let's have another round of applause for Matthew and Paul.